Thank you, Marissa. Thank you, everyone, for being here today. Thank you for coming up to this room. I feel like negotiating, getting to this room is the same process that I've been feeling in like what I made and how it can be accessed, because this beautiful call happened in like March of this year that was guided by the presence of the Peregrine falcons, and I'm so thankful for Mary to be here because she's been coming to this building since 2002, physically having a very particular kind of interaction with the falcons, and then just her much larger life's work that I only am getting to know because of this call. I have a little bit of background before I totally jump in. I hope for this to be very informal too and conversational, so if anybody has like a burning thought or question as I'm speaking, please feel free to like raise a hand or just make a bodily gesture. I'll probably see it. There was a call for, and I'm an artist in residence here on the 4th floor with an organization called High Concept Labs, which has been this beautiful sort of branch system, is how I feel about it, because it's allowing for this sort of rehearsal space. It's allowing for me to have a kind of an ear to the ground when it comes to these calls. I might have heard about it anyway because I'm thankful to be a part of the experimental sound community here, but I don't use social media, so it might have been after the fact. So I'm thankful to High Concept Labs for just, I was at a very particular perch to answer this call. And I didn't answer the call because I have any kind of relationship to falcons or you know, like them being an endangered species previously or anything like that. It was more just having work based in very intimate recordings. Anyone who does that, there's always birds. There's always birds. And metaphorically too, I think anyone who is around people who use their voice for singing is another kind of way of being around birds. So my grandmother, who I have a lot of recordings of in part of my sort of collection, really I feel like that, making that connection of like feeling an urge to be able to bring those recordings that I have of her singing voice out, like that's kind of the core of how the proposal was written. And then I selected a bathroom space, a restroom space in the building because I felt like just, I don't know, a lot of, a sound teacher of mine kind of made fun of that, of like all sound art goes in the bathroom. It was a little bit more intentional for me because in just spending time in this building and being a part of High Concept Labs, the bathrooms here are like, there's a lot of recesses, there's a lot of rooms, and so it feels like a place that you can go and disappear, like honestly. Or a place for gossip, or a place just to take care of yourself, to take a break. And so it was very intentional selecting the bathroom and selecting, and like just the concert of that with thinking about my grandmother's singing voice, thinking about rest, thinking about just an intimate conversation that one might be having with himself or remembering. So these are really beautiful experiences for me because I have a lot of what I would feel like in my observations as rodent qualities, like a lot of hiding in walls or like just not being ready to feel evaluated, anything that I'm working on or making. Because I've been collecting sound recordings for over 10 years, and this is really the me just starting to emerge with like what I would make. So all of these branches are kind of happening, and I got to meet Mary very briefly in May because there was a banding that was happening of the falcons, and I'll let Mary talk more about what exactly that means, because I think it happens multiple times a year.
No, once a year.
Once a year?
Once a
Okay, once a year in each place where they are.
Yeah.
So this was in May, and it happens on the 9th floor. And when somebody named SY used to work here, and SY took me up to the 9th floor, and on the 9th floor there's a window, and the window's covered in like a wax paper. And she lifted the wax paper for me, and there was just this solitary falcon.
Can I stop 1 second?
Please.
Question for all you guys. How many of you have seen her piece yet? Okay, so we'll know you want to describe that, which you're probably leading up to. Okay, the other question is, how many of you guys know about the falcons or have seen the falcons or the stuff in there? Okay, that's all I wanted to know.
Good, thank you.
Sorry to interrupt.
No, you're not interrupting. This is great. Yeah, no, because I hadn't either. Like I had been here as an artist in resident. My High Concept Labs residency is a year long, and I wasn't aware. Even though there's an art installation on the first floor of the falcons, like there's like a video kind of presence of them.
Yeah.
I really wasn't aware of their presence until this call. So answering the call in my own little sort of like metaphorical journey with my grandmother and restrooms and rest and intimacy and, you know, and
explain what the call exactly was. What did they ask?
the call was
you?
really,
Just really
I mean,
open floored.
It was pretty open. It was pretty much just like, we're looking for
Sound piece of falcon needed forward.
I mean, it was just vague in the sense of like a work in response to the presence of these birds, you know, so it really could have been anything, you know. And again, like, so my heart went to my grandmother, which is the beauty of sitting here with you, is just the high contrast of, you know.
I find beautiful singing at this end of the spectrum and Peregrine falcon vocalization.
Exactly.
Over there.
So that's what I learned when I came for the banding is, you know, well, first of all, with the wax paper, because why is the wax paper on the window?
So they don't really see in and are not disturbed by what the activity that's going on in the building.
Okay.
You know.
Yeah. So this wax paper was lifted for me, and this solitary falcon was sitting on the rail, just like, I mean, the most direct eye contact I think I've maybe ever experienced. And it was just, just incredible moment, like this draining moment. I don't mean draining in a negative sense. I mean draining in like something draining out or draining in. I don't really know. But it was, that moment also influenced like how I, you know, developed the piece. And the piece is 20 minutes long. It plays at the top of the hour, sort of also like just in reference of like feeling like you're at home or maybe in a sacred space where something is chiming at the top of an hour.
So there's no visual aspect to it at all. It's just something that people hear over a speaker.
Yes, great question.
Time your bathroom breaks.
Yeah.
Is it in the men's as well as the women's?
Yes, it's all, yeah.
Obviously, I haven't seen it yet.
No, and that's the thing, is like and it's here at the end of the year. But also, these are great questions because, again, like you coming up to this building, like negotiating also, because for me, I designed it for it to be this like really subtle thing that you happen upon if you happen to be in the bathroom at that time, and like.
Did you listen to online different calls of peregrines? Do you guys want to hear some?
Mm-hmm. Please, and they're in the piece as well.
There's a wonderful app for a phone called Merlin. So if you're out in nature and you want to know what's the calls you're hearing, you could put this on and go, and then it'll identify the bird for you. But you could also look up. So if I hit explore and then search and we type in peregrine, there we go. Then it gives me a list of sounds. So it just calls them calls. But so, oops, I don't have the. Okay. As opposed to. explain them later. Just thought you should hear some
So,
calls.
and this is where the beautiful contrast comes in, because I think one of the... I'm fine for that to be our backdrop, Mary.
It just kept going down the list.
Yeah. The piece of my proposal that I'm forgetting, because when I'm talking about intimacy, I'm really referring to like all of my work is deeply relational. So it was also this imagination of like two courting birds, so two different falcons, call and response.
Okay. Courtship. Then I could tell you which one of those was courtship. Oh, I turned the sound off again. They call it e-chupping, and it's usually accompanied with bows and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So that's courtship.
So I
Sexy, wasn't it?
So my imagination, yes, played with these ideas and these sounds, and anyway, I'm losing my train of thought now. Thank you, Mary.
So you're going to your process of designing it from here, listening to these sounds.
Thank you.
And your grandmother's singing voice, which tell me how they connect, because again.
Only in the note of like the very like.
Did you incorporate her in the piece?
I do.
Oh, cool.
I do. Yeah, I do.
Cool.
I do. And I, because of like, I'm also getting to know like describing myself with rodent qualities earlier, and like just now coming out into like sharing more. It's like I'm also simultaneously like having to discern how sensitive I am as an artist. So it's like all these deeply intimate sounds, all of a sudden they're in a space like this that I spend no time in for real. I mean, I spend time here for my residency, but like I have no relationship with for real. And I had this like guttural, I don't know if I told you this story, Alex. I told this to my friend Isra. I had this, I think I told you. I had this moment at some point throughout the process where I felt like, is it okay? And my grandmother's passed on, so I don't know. Is it okay that I like called her in on her singing voice, called her singing voice in for this piece? And I felt like very nervy about that. And on installation day, Alex and Kate helped me install. And there was this wonderful man who works in maintenance here named Ruben. I didn't know him, but I met him that day. But anyway, that was my grandfather's name. So in that moment, for whatever reason, I stopped using my energy to worry about, and then just like the courtship of the, everything about courtship became like, okay, or like, I stopped using my energy to worry after that. So I think like when I say my work is deeply relational, obviously I'm looking for those messages, but those messages do end up grounding out or anchoring something for me, like in the process and longer term. And what else do I want to say about the piece? It isn't just to be experienced. I don't know. I think because of also like when I got to be with Mary, and it's also an amazing process just to witness, because Mary's been doing this for so long. So there's this like deep focus. Like we're not really actually meeting y'all until today, because we didn't stay in touch with this process. I didn't reach out to Mary again in this process, but also because Mary was deeply focused on the role of that day. And I could feel that, and also was in my own world, like projecting a lot. And I'm not using projection as a negative sense. I think we can't help it. But I feel like, for me, like in the banding process, I was witnessing like distress, or I was witnessing like young babies being like, from their mother. And even though it was just for a moment, like I'm thinking about like, trauma downloading in the body. I'm thinking about all these things. And, which is a totally contrasted way to the way that like Mary's work works, and the way that preservation may work, or, and going back to like, they're no longer endangered species. Yeah.
Well, stress in that it's a component of it. You can't get around it, but one thing I can't dwell on it either, other than to recognize if something is really wrong, then you need to deal with that. But Banding is do you guys know what banding is when we're talking about banding? So if you look at the pictures and watch some of the video and that, and you look at any of the adults, look at their legs. They call it, if we were in England, they call it ringing. It's like putting a little bracelet on the leg. And what's written on it is unique to that individual. So if you can see the bird later and you can read that band, I can tell you how old it is and where it's come from. You learn about longevity, you learn about dispersal. When we put those bands on are when you have the best access to it. So the chick is as big as, oh, stop. Now that's distress. Turn the sound on. Oh, no, no, no. I'll close the app, that'll do it. Silence you, baby. So the chick is as big as it's gonna get, so I don't have to worry about that band's gonna, that leg is gonna outgrow the band, but they don't have flight feathers or anything, so I don't have to worry about prematurely fledging. You can get them before they obviously run away from you and that. So banding day is the day we come when the chicks are just at the right age for that. We're bringing them inside because the parents are not pleased by this, so they'll be flying at you in defense and that. So you want to keep the chickens as safe as you can while you're putting this bands on, and the adults the same way. So we'll bring them inside. Each bird gets a turn. They gets the bracelets put or the bands put on the legs. We'll do something like take a little blood sample so we can look at genetics, or we can sex them via that way. I'm judging the sex of the bird actually by the leg, but it's a nice way to confirm it. And birds of prey, girls are bigger than boys. And a male peregrine is called a tiercel. It means a third. They're a third smaller than the females, which are just called falcons. So if I have if worry, you put the larger band on, you put the female band on. And so each one gets its little turn, and I put them in a little cardboard box with their own little dividers so they can't hang on to each other, do any harm while you're trying to get at each one. And again, to keep that stress, with the box I can close the cover, and it's kind of like having blinders on horses or something so that they don't see, it keeps them calmer. And then you put them back out on the nest when you're done. The whole process might take about 10 minutes a bird, so half an hour or whatever the case might be. If there was any risk that the adults wouldn't take the bird back, you wouldn't be banding them. We want these birds out there breeding successfully in the wild because it was a species that was once endangered. They were almost wiped out due to the influence of DDT. In the 1960s, the North American population was down to 11%. There were none in the Midwest and none in the eastern part of the US. They were declining worldwide. Illinois had no peregrines nesting from 1951 up until 1987. When the reintroduction process started and we were breeding them in captivity to release them into the wild. And they were a naturally cliff-dwelling bird, but they're using these building ledges like a pseudo-cliff. I didn't put them here. They found this building on their own and that. My job is sort of the liaison for the bird to the public or to the building managers to say, hey, you got this bird. This is what's going to happen with it, whatnot. So it's wonderful that the tenants over the year and the ownership of this building has embraced them for over that 20 years. But that whole process of banding, I'm not sure if that's in one of the videos, but you can Google it, go to YouTube, and it's basically just putting bracelets on them so we can track them in the future and see where they go. Sorry, I sort of segued into that sort of thing.
No.
Any interaction you have with the birds, or are there other incidents where you do check-ins with them?
Say that again.
Is that the only incident where you have contact?
Oh, for the most part, physically with the birds themselves, for the most part. I monitor our state population. So if it's in Illinois, I think of it as belonging to me. So you're sort of, in order to keep track of how the population's doing, you monitor the nest sites. Each spring we'll try to reconfirm who they are by the bands on them. You'll look at, did they lay eggs? Did they not lay eggs? how many hatched, how many fledged. Some of that can be done remotely through webcams. There's a number of web cameras on some of our nests. Rockford has a beautiful one. In fact, they run it year round, but right now if you went to it and you could just Google Rockford Peregrine and find the link, you're not gonna see anything. So some of it's done remotely. Most of it is that actual holding the birds interaction is around Bandy Day. And then if they get into trouble, rehab centers like Willowbrook Wildlife Center out in Glen Ellen take care of them. So might be transporting, it might be something like that. But it's all remote. It's observations from afar. Yeah.
How do you initially get alerted that the birds are nesting on a building? Is it up to just
A lot of it is building engineers. So you go out to do behavior, and that changes depending on the time of the year. There's individual variants, but then there's also what's going on. So if you're approaching a nest site and it's egg laying time, they will sit tight on those eggs and not go. Female might not budge at all. Male usually will take off and let her come in, and that's an advantage of her being bigger than the male, is she's the bigger defender of the nest on that. So you let the bigger, more aggressive bird come in and that. So you think that they're very common. You could think of condos now, and I have had more birds in flower pots than you would believe. You go away, you come back in April from the Bahamas, you've been wintering down there, and suddenly you have this bird in your flower pot. You think, oh, okay, I can get through this. They're common, they're staying by the flower pot. Well, once those eggs hatch and you have young, the aggressiveness, it's like kicks into the roof. And that's when you have birds flying at you and one in defense. And so
when you get a call usually?
that's when I usually get a call of saying, hey, we've got this bird around. Or they do use the same nest site year after year after year. You might have a changeover of adults. So in the 20 years, these are not the original pair anymore. Upwards of captivity level age is 20 years. Out in the wild, you get 14 to 16, you've got an old bird or an old breeder. So that could change over. And if they're changing over at one at a time, the male will hold the territory and he gets a new girl. If the female stays and the male's gone, she'll get a new male, so you can have a long time. So then they know, they sort of know, but it's usually something flying at defense. The other thing might be, hey, there's this sick bird laying down out your window. What's going on? You get a call about this sick bird, and it's not a sick bird, it's a bird incubating eggs. And but yeah, it's from the public, it's from people, and somehow it works to me, up to me. Yes.
Hi, I was going to ask, in terms of the heights of the buildings, because they're nesting on all these skyscrapers in the Loop, for example, and knowing how many are nesting, do you know whether they prefer the taller buildings or the lower buildings? Because I did hear there was one on Willis, for example, and then B, are there other raptors like kestrels that are also nesting on skyscrapers throughout the city?
Okay, couple questions in there. First one had to do with the heights of the nesting thing. It's not the height of the ledge, it's the architecture of it. Can they, if they're sitting on that ledge, and they don't bring any substrate into the nest, they just make a slight depression in whatever might be gravel or material might be on that ledge. So if they're laying on the eggs, can they see all around? If you have a high wall and she's sitting behind this, that's not as good for her, because then the only thing is up. They need to be able to see around. Are you out of prevailing winds? If I have this corner where I'm nice and safe and out of the wind, but I have this corner where the north is, of course I'm going to go to the other corner. So it has more to do with that sort of thing as far as height isn't an issue, it's the architecture. What was the second part? Other raptors that you can come across. There are other ones around, certainly, but as far as competition for the ledge use, not so much. Kestrels are second cavity nesters. Kestrel is a smaller cousin to the peregrine. It's another falcon, but they're going to go into a hole like a tree, or we used to have some on the Field Museum that went up into the under the columns and nested in places like that. If you're driving along the expressway and you see a box on the back of the sign, you know, a lot of those are for actually kestrels, you know, on the back of the. You have red-tailed hawks, but that's a big stick one, you know. So there are other raptors around, but usually competing for an urban ledge, it's predominantly peregrines around here. Yeah.
I was just thinking about how Regina was talking about the relational aspects of her work, and I would love to hear from you how you think about your relationship with these falcons, which seems fairly long term.
It's 35 years of, I used to know them really, when you only had one or two, that was a lot easier. And then, you know, yeah. I did have a permanently disabled peregrine falcon that I use for education. And I have a red-tailed hawk along those lines. So, and your new word for the day is mews, M-E-W-S, is a house for a hawk. So the mews is built in the backyard. They belong to me. They don't belong to the museum. They were, you know, they're not pets. You can't term that. They're wild birds that unfortunately couldn't be wild. That's as close as I would come to saying you had some relationship to that bird, and it still wasn't of, you know, my German shepherds loved me. This bird could care less. It actually liked men more than it liked women for whatever reason. You would hear, if I brought the bird to do a talk and I had him in my office, her in the office in the museum, if my colleague Tom came in, you'd hear that Egypt chopping just going to the town. It went crazy. Its problem was it was an imprint. Somebody took her out of a nest and tried to make her pet. And right when she should have been learning what to hunt and where to hunt it, she was fed by people. So physically, she was fine, but mentally you screwed up the process. The same issue was with the red-tailed hawk. And he was one that liked women more than men, so it was probably, I would guess, men took him out of the nest, and then the peregrine was probably the opposite. But otherwise, it's just, I do what I need to do. I'm very cognizant of what they're doing, what their behavior is. That's part of my job, is to explain to you, you know, why you can't go out, or she's going to behave this way at this time of the year or that time of the year, to keep you safe as well as keeping them safe. So when I'm out and I'm with them, I'm very just focused on, I want to get it done. You can have a whole conversation with me, and then I won't remember it. I mean, I can answer you, I'll do what I need to do, but I just really, my mind and the whole mental process is just focused on the birds at that time. Yeah, they're good, you know, and you get personality differences just like there is a room full of personality difference. And there is a range of how they will react, just a range of what upsets you versus what upsets you, what upsets me. So we have some sites where you just know you have a more aggressive, a more defensive female there, or could be a male. We were banding at one site, I tell too many stories, so you will have to stop me. At the Broadway site up north one year, and there were 4 or however many, oops, sorry about sound person, whatever many chicks there were that year. And it was a bunch of females, and there was one little male, and he was tiny. And the females were while you're banding them and having their little fit. He was so quiet, I named him Mouse. I was thinking, oh, child, you know, as quiet as a church mouse. And that, you know, and just, okay, Mouse fledges, and a couple years later, he ends up at UIC. He is the most, and excuse my term, pissy little male, you know, just the dominance, that aggressiveness that came out of something that your impression of it being so quiet and just so, you know, was just very interesting to see difference. So there's individual variance, there, you know, but there's a relative norm within the species and that. How did you said you were sort of put off by banding, but did you see a difference between the birds, or? I don't remember if they were vocal or not, because
They were. I mean, I used
35 years of bandings, I
yeah,
don't remember.
No. I used some of. I used some of the vocalizations of them in the box.
Oh, okay.
Before the box, and and for me, it was. It felt. Again, this process has been like deeply reflective for me relative to projection, because like I said before, it's like we can't help it. Truly can't help it. Like I remember being on the Facebook page, because there's this great. Do you run the Facebook page?
Yeah.
Right? Okay.
It's all me.
and there is. I remember there being a very particular post that caught me, which was there were some eggs that were taken. There was a post about eggs being taken or missing from a location that was on the south side here in Chicago. And one of the commenters of this post was like, well, what do you expect? It's the south side. So it's like, this is how deep like the projection is.
I remember it.
Well, and it's not, it's just what I'm saying, it's like, this is how deep the projections are like running, like not only related to like how we might feel somebody's experiencing something emotionally, but like even our like racial politics, like all of a sudden are on these bird eggs, you know what I'm saying? So for me, this has also just been reflective of like how we do that. We can't help it. I think it's really like, I'm thinking about it in relationship to the generosity of compassion, where it's like, you know, to be able to just kind of do that has a lot to do with compassion, and it also has this shadow way as well. So that was for me kind of, again, I did feel like emotionally there was a moment where, and I was mostly like low to the ground, so I was already kind of low to the ground during the banding process, but I felt like even if I wasn't low to the ground, I would have wanted to get lower to the ground because of the way that the sound sounded. But that doesn't mean that I actually know what's going on, and so one of the things that kept getting written in relationship to this process was like, what we know of the Peregrine falcon, and you can fill in the blank with almost any other person or creature, like is what we imagine it to be.
It would have been interesting to see how sound has changed in the 20 years, because this space has changed in the 20 years. The very first years I remember, and you're essentially, they're nesting on a fire escape, if you know, outside the 9th floor, and that. So they've been in the same location for the 20 years, but the inside of the building has changed. So the first years, I remember brown paneling for the bottom half of the walls, and it's sort of subdivided in whatever. Remember when nature kind of sings? It wasn't quite wallpaper, but printed on paper across it, hanging out. Anyway. Then it went to completely closed because they had compactor systems for storage, and the space we used very small. And then that left, and it became think of the whole floor from one end to the other, open space with the columns. So your the sound is going to echo and change. And now this year was the first year that there are rooms back up, so you're working in a tiny space. So it's going to sound different each year. Plus, depending upon the birds, they could be louder or quieter, different pitch and tone to them. You can listen to the same call and go around the world, and you might hear different tones to that from the different subspecies and that. I don't know, I haven't quite done that, but on the few here, there could be individual variation. There's something I don't know if peregrines have, but way back when I was working on my master's degree, I was helping out with loon research. And it was up in the UP, and the hypothesis had to do if they were holding multiple lakes as a territory because there wasn't enough fish in the natal lake. So are they bringing in fish to feed the young? So you're out there all day with recorders, recording, are they up, down, whatnot. Well, the professor that I was helping do that was the one that discovered you can identify an individual common loon male by the yodel call. If you run that call and that sound through a sonogram, and it's like the EKG where you see the lines and things like that, you can get the characteristics that could say, it's you, and it's you, and it's you, and it's you. For the males are the ones that do that call, so we would have been out of it, but you know, you can identify individual by their calls. Be neat to know if you could for peregrines.
Are you saying the calls are unique, each one has its own voice?
Well, you're essentially doing the same call, but it's like if we all tried to sing the same song, who's in what pitch, who's in what key, who's a little faster, who's a little slower. So there's individual variance in that sort of manner of how loud, how slow, how what tone you're at.
Are the calls like a learned behavior? Do they get like, are they mimicking their parents in any way, or does it seem to be more?
I think that's genetic. It's interesting to see what is learned behavior and what is genetic based in that. With peregrines, they can learn how to fly and they can learn how to hunt without a parent showing them. That's how the whole reintroduction process worked. They used a method called hacking. It's H-A-C-K-I-N-G. And it's essentially like dispersal out of a nest site, but instead of having an adult show them what to do and feeding them, you're sort of hidden feeding them. You don't want them to go, here's your lunch, because that's where you get imprinting. But the boxes and everything were designed to do it in a manner where they're not going to see you. And then, like a parent, if they start, after they're flying and they start hunting, you feed them less and less. And there's, you know, methods that way. So in that case, it seems to be instinct. I wonder how, here's things that fascinate me. I wonder how does a cowbird is a little brown, almost black with a brown head bird, about the size of a skinny robin. And it's a bird called a brood parasite. So it doesn't raise its young. It lays it in your nest, and it lays it in your nest, and it lays it in your nest. So in different species, it's like I'm a peregrine, but I put it in the kestrel nest, and then I lay the egg in the red tail nest, and I put it over there, and they raise the young. Well, how does the young cowbird that was raised by the common yellowthroat know to go mate with the cowbird and vocalization? So that has to be things that are genetically imprinted in their chromosomes or whatever to come. I don't, you know.
It sounds like the prompt for this sound piece was a little different than how you usually start your sound-based works. I'm curious what you'll take from this experience into future works, or how you see this project kind of influencing future projects.
Yeah, that's a great question, because I have a high vampire quality where like, being invited is like the way that I have to work. Like, so responding to a call and then like was definitely challenging to me. I think it just, for me, the awkwardness of this process, like even just the awkwardness of like making it so that it's in a restroom so that people might have to make an appointment to go to the restroom to hear this, and like having a public talk even about something that's happening in a restroom, and even just, not quite awkwardness, but just like
Plumber's daughter, it's cool.
I love it. That's actually wonderful, because my parents clean for a living as well, and there was this moment where Marissa was with me, and we saw Matt, who kind of runs a lot of things around here, and he was apologizing to me because of kind of like the way that the bathroom looked, because like in this art realm that we find ourselves in, like this can't be okay. But like my favorite part is walking up to the installation, and like underneath the vinyl on the wall, there's a cleaner's cart from the person who's, you know, doing their job, which is just like, similarly, like to me, I relate to that much more deeply than, so I think in answer to your question, Angie, like just the awkwardness of challenging myself to make very intimate things that now all of a sudden have all of these other like conversational nodes, like this one that we're getting to have here. I mean, there's always something that happens when you say yes to that, and I'm okay with that.
Is sound a new thing, or is a lot of your previous artwork in that been sound oriented?
I'd say it's mostly sound-centered. I feel like my sweet spot is becoming like doing sound design collaboratively for other artists' projects, like experimental films and that sort of thing. But I think like for me, and I was on a walk also with my friend Isra, who's here today, sorry to keep putting you on the spot, when I said like I'm, like part of how I'm developing my sound work, one of the things that I said out loud was, sometimes when I miss you, I make a tapestry with the memory of your sound. So it's like when I'm doing work, it's like all these little recordings that I'm collecting over time, over, you know, just it's sort of like an art of remembering, and composing with sounds that didn't happen in the same time or place, or even in the same kind of like relationship, like whether it's sounds of my grandmother or sounds of my dad walking with his long keychain or whatever it is. It's like just these sound marks that for me, like for some people it might be scent, or for some people it might be something else. It's like these things that are deeply mark something underneath words and something underneath the relationship itself, that I keep learning about the relationship from composing with these sounds and from pairing sounds that didn't happen in the same time. There's something else that gets revealed about relationships when you're sort of layering in that way. It's like a remix of time, if you will.
A neat thing I find, whether it's you're talking the nature, you're talking the art, I like both the subjects are a springboard for your audience, your normal target audience, into another realm. So people that, you come to something like this, people that are primarily in the art world, you don't think of nature and that, you're getting a little, hey, exposure to nature and to endangered species and recovery in that way. Or if you come from the falcon standpoint, you're coming over here, you know, and the importance of having art in your life and how art can reach other people to educate them about nature. And it's like taking another, you go around, serendipity around the corner in that. So that, I find that very cool.
Mary, actually, I wanted to ask you about that specifically. So, you know, coming from a science standpoint, have you been approached to do this kind of thing before? And like, what is your personal experience? What's your personal experience with like interacting with artists? Do you feel like it influences, you know, the way that you're looking at your work? And yeah, just.
Well, I have a sort of built-in bias, it's not bias, it's not the right word. Exposure would be a better one to artwork. Because, do you guys know the artist Peggy McNamara? She's watercolors and that. Peggy's sister married my cousin, so she's family indirectly. So I've known Peggy for years in her artwork. Well, I was trying to write a book about the Peregrines in all these years. University of Chicago Press went, no. And then Peggy went, no, we gotta do this. And so we put out, I wish I had brought a book. I didn't put a book in my backpack. We wrote a book together. And it was a fascinating thing to see the process. And I would tell Peggy, hey, the chapter is on this and this and this. And I gave her 8 pictures. And she melded all that into this beautiful piece of artwork. Every stunning chapter had its own stunning photo that sort of went in that way. And, you know, her pieces are very distinctive that way. So I had that exposure. And then, do you guys know the artist Tony Fitzpatrick? Collages and that. He did a lot of album covers and that. He's an actor, a wonderful man. We were banding at our St. Mary's place, which is on top of the roof of our hospital. Happened to be a hospital that Tony had been in when he had heart problems and heart surgery some years ago, and the falcons were an inspiration for him in nature to keep on going. So he came to banding. Well, that's not a piece of art that I would normally go that way. I don't understand Picasso, that's not my thing. So I like, you know, if it looks like a photograph, I'm like, woo, you know, but that's individual taste. But that exposed me to a whole another realm, even though you're still talking picture pieces and that. So it hits that way, but it's not just the artist coming at you, it's the teacher, or it's going to the fire station and talking to the firemen about the birds around the corner, but they have you come in, because you're going to talk there. Or I find that in a way more exciting than talking to the scientist, because it's sort of like preaching to the choir, which is fun in itself, but it's more fun when you get somebody that would have, oh my God, I didn't know they lived here, or I didn't know that. And your daughter, is it your daughter with you? I love kids coming. She's the most important one in the room to me, because she's our future scientist. She's our future artist. She can do both of those. All power to her. That's beautiful. I can see it from here. She's got the Peregrine on a... Yeah. Yeah. That is great. You're going to have to, when we're done talking, you're going to come up and you can show me